Hey everyone, Liam here. So today's video we are going to go over Konrad Kurze's trim. So if the video is helpful, please hit that subscribe button. If you want to support the channel at all, feel free to get in touch with me through my Patreon, Instagram or Facebook for any tuition or commissions that you might be interested in. Let me know in the comments if you've got any feedback or anything else you want to see from the channel. I hope it's helpful. Here we go. So to start off, we have on the wet palette GW Rhinox Hide, and the top right is Vallejo Model Color Basic Skin Tone, and then on the right hand side is just a bit of white. So we're going to mix up our colors to start. So firstly, the Rhinox Hide is pure at the top, and then I'm doing a first mix of Rhinox Hide and Basic Skin Tone. This is probably 1 part Rhinox Hide, 1 part Basic Skin Tone. The second one I'm doing right now is just more Basic Skin Tone than the previous one. So you get a paler brown desaturated color. So there's probably 2 parts Basic Skin Tone to 1 part Rhinox Hide. And you can see roughly what we're going for on the screen at the moment. So you can easily replicate it. It's not particularly challenging. And then what we're going to do is with the Basic Skin Tone, we're going to add a little bit of white to it, and that'll give us a bit of a bridge between the Basic Skin Tone and the white. So we've got our progression of colors that we can just jump between. All of these colors as well are having a little bit of water added to them, so I want them fluid enough so they're not going to obscure any of the details, and I want them consistent enough. I want them thick enough to leave a fairly opaque mark, because I don't want to have to go over this several times. You can see on screen I've already painted half of Kurze. I've painted the left hand side of the trim. That was to get an idea of whether I liked the tone to this armor, and I'm quite happy with it. It's quite warm, so it contrasts well with the cold blue of his armor. So we are painting this as a non-metal metallic. For anyone who knows me knows that I prefer non-metal metallic, not because I think it's better, but for me, for photography, I have more control and it's easier to get pictures. So it's just my preference. We can go over, we could debate all day long which one's better. The reality is whatever you like works. So it's important to note with this, you need to make sure that you're catching all of the edges. So if you've got a long edge on the armor panel, such as the knee or above the shin, you need to make sure you catch that with the darkest mix. So in this case, the whole of the trim has been base coated with Rhinox Hide, so there's no black on the trim. And then I'm using the first mix between the Basic Skin Tone and the Rhinox Hide. So this is basically the darkest part. And as you can see, I'm picking out those edges because that's going to frame it. And it's really important with non-metal metallic that you catch the edges, because you have to frame your shapes to make it readable. And what I'm also doing with the rest of the trim is I'm painting towards my light points, and these light points are following the light on the blue armor. So if I've got a highlight where the blue armor is, I'm also going to have a highlight where the non-metal metallic trim is. So the 2 important things to note here is, firstly, the smaller you do your highlight on the metallic, as in the narrower the highlight, the shinier it is going to look. And you're going to see that as we go, that my highlights are actually quite small. So, and the thing is as well is, when you've got curves and you've got interesting shapes, it's easier to create metallic reflections. It's easier to imitate that metallic result because you have smaller shapes. And when it's a flat surface, it's much harder. The other thing to think about when you're painting this is your direction of your brush stroke. So remember, where you remove your brush from the model, that will leave a stronger mark on the model. So in this case, if I want my highlight to be in a certain place, I will remove my brush at that point of the highlight. So I'll pull my brush towards where the brightest point is going to be. And the reason for that is it leaves the strongest mark, and it will help with that transition going across as well. So just be aware of where your brush mark is. Now you can see on the arm, the trim is nice and simple. The shoulder pad, it's just about picking out the parts that you want brighter. So the shoulder pad itself, if you look at the inside part of the shoulder pad, that's basically a sphere. So you pick a section of that curve that you're going to highlight. And as for the jagged section at the top of the trim, I've just gone half of it and gone brighter. Now the thing is, what you need to remember with non-metal metallic as well is it never looks right until the end, and you can see how rough it's looking at the moment. But just pick your highlight points and then push your brush towards that highlight point. And at the moment, all you're doing is just laying down that first layer. You're just sketching in where your brightest points are going to be. And I would also probably say it's better to do your edge highlights around everything with this color because it's much more subtle. I've done it with a color later on and probably wasn't the best choice. So next up, you can see on the wet palette, we're just going to that brighter mix now. So we've got a little bit more of the basic skin tone in with the Rhinox hide, just to make it a little bit brighter. If you go up in your increments of color slowly, it makes it much easier to get a nice transition. Now you can see the difference is this time is I'm not painting everything on the trim. So on those edges, I'm now leaving the middle sections and I'm trying to make very small marks. And the same as where my highlight points are, you can see where it's getting brighter on the corner of that shin and then on the spike parts on it as well. These markings are much, much smaller. Remember, the smaller your marks, as in when they're not as wide, the shinier it will look, and that will help with the metallic look. So small marks in this case. And the other thing as well to think about when you're painting on metal metallic, especially when you're starting out, is a good rule of thumb is if you paint things like a gem. So you'll have when you paint a gem, you have a main highlight, let's say at the bottom you have your bright colored light, and then on the opposite side you have a second light. So let's say, for example, with the GW gems, when Games Workshop paint gems, they'll paint the bottom of it, say, green. The bottom of the gem is green, and then on the top you'll have a very small bright dot, and it's that bright dot that gives you the idea that it's got a reflection. Metallics are pretty much the same. You have your contrast of light and dark, and then on the opposite side it's always quite nice if you go into the dark area and add a very small highlight, but just don't go as bright as your original one. So good rule of thumb when painting metallics, especially non-metal metallic, is think of it as a gem. You have your main highlight and then you have a small secondary one, and then that gives it the illusion of a reflection. And you can just see across the model I'm just picking out where I've done my highlights previously with the previous color. I'm now picking those out again, but I'm doing it smaller. So I'm not covering that whole previous highlight. I'm painting within those highlights, and I'm just strengthening it with the brighter color. Right, so this is the final section. You can see we've got enough contrast to make it so it's starting to look like a metal. You have your main highlights along the inside of that leg where the knee is and the middle of the shin, and then on the outside of that leg you have much smaller highlights, and then that gives it the idea that it's a reflective surface. But we need to go brighter now, so these are really, really small marks that I'm doing, and this is with the pure basic skin tone from Vallejo, and I'm just picking out those points where I want the reflection to be brightest. So you can see here on that knee, on the right hand side of the kneecap, there's a very small highlight, and then the main highlight is on the left hand side of the kneecap in the center of it. And that's exactly what I was talking about, where if you have those secondary highlights, it gives the illusion that it's a metallic surface. I'm also picking out the rivets at this point as well, and I'm just putting a dot on top of them. But remember, sometimes a hard mark is better than a soft blended transition, because you need to have the model readable. So sometimes it's better to have a nice hard mark to define a shape than it is to have a really soft transition, because what we're painting is really small, and sometimes it can be confusing or difficult for people's eyes to really understand what they're looking at such a small scale. And you can just see, again, I'm just going on the inside of those highlights that I've already done. So if I've already placed the highlight down, the highlight I'm now putting on top of those with the basic skin tone is even smaller. And in all seriousness, at this point, we're almost painting dots. These highlights are so small because although not everything needs to be ultra shiny, in this case, this is the result I'm going for. And you can see that it really is quite dark in those shadows. It's near enough black, but it's actually Rhinox hide. You can also see how important it is to make sure you edge highlight around the shapes for readability, for framing, but also because metallic surfaces do catch the edges, and it's a really important feature to sell the result. So we're just finishing up the basic skin tone. Now, you can see it looks like a metal now. In hand, because obviously the camera and people's photographs do change how something looks. So in my hand, it still needs a bit more of a pop. So I'm now on to the white. This is pure white. You need to be so careful with the pure white. I've said it when we were doing the lion and his metallics. You just want a tiny dot for the white. The more white that you put on, actually, the less shiny it will look, because you're effectively making that highlight wider, so you lose the shine. The white dot is there to reinforce the illusion that this is a light point hitting. So as you can see where I've done that leg, I've picked out almost like the points, the actual pointy sections in our highlights, just to really reinforce how bright that is. And also, if you've got a secondary highlight, so say for example on the inside of the leg, on the inside of that kneecap, that's my brightest point. On the right hand side of the knee, I'm not going to have a white dot, because I don't want that secondary highlight for the metallics to be as bright as my main highlight. It's a really important point. Our secondary highlight is not as bright as our main highlight. So it's probably worth pointing out, as I'm just going over the model on screen, that the paint recipe, the color recipe that I'm using for this metallic is quite unusual. It's not something that I've really seen many people do, and that's not because I'm doing anything original or anything special. It's just the result works because, not because of the colors, because the colors are not important. The result works because of how small, how narrow my highlights are, and also the fact that I have a secondary reflection. So what you need to remember is, although we talk about non-metal metallics and stuff like that, actually the result that you're getting has got nothing to do with the colors. It's got everything to do with your light placement and the size of your highlights. The reality is with these colors, if I had made these highlights much wider, I'd still get the same result, but it wouldn't look metallic. It'd probably look more like a dirty stone. So what you see on screen is actually the process finished. It really is that simple, straightforward, and it's really quick and easy. You just need to remember the direction of your brush stroke and your primary and secondary highlights. And there we have it. This is Kurze finished. A lot of the process I haven't recorded because it's exactly the same as what I've done on the lion, and it seems ridiculous to repeat myself on the same playlist of videos. But you get an idea of what we've been going for. The next up, we're going to do the base, and that's going to be the final video in this series, and then we're calling it done. So hope it's helpful. As always, feel free to like and subscribe. Feel free to check out my other videos in the playlist. And that's it. Thanks very much.